Darwinian evolution. Junk science.
Evolution is a demonic doctrine of death. It's totally opposite to what we find in the scriptures, which is a teaching of life. All of it springs from life, all of it brings life. The demons are quite opposite to that. 1 Timothy 4:1. But the Spirit says expressly that in the last days some will fall away from the faith, paying attention to seducing spirits and doctrines of demons. Friends, we're in the last days. We should expect doctrines of demons to be seducing people, misleading people. I'm going to show you that evolution is one of those doctrines of demons that produces death. You've seen the origin of evolution. It's actually came out of relationships that these various so-called scientists had with spirit beings, demonic entities. But let's take a look a little deeper at the doctrine of evolution. Now, I showed you this in the last message, but I want to bring this in now from the standpoint of this demonic connection. Darwin himself, in The Descent of Man, basically said that people who are crippled in some way, disabled people, people he thinks of as inferior, that would include people that he viewed on a lower racial rung than himself and the rest of the elitists that he rubbed elbows and hobnobbed with. Those people basically needed to die out to purify the race. That was his thinking. We're going to look at eugenics, and that came directly from Darwin's cousin. And when people tell you about that, they never tell you that he got the idea directly from Darwin. Not just the general idea of evolution, but the specific idea that we have to get rid of the undesirable people. That came directly from Darwin. Apparently some witch doctor told him about it. I don't know. So that brings us to Francis Galton, called the father of eugenics, the cousin, I believe, of Darwin. He wrote a book entitled Natural Inheritance. Really, the premise of Galton is that if the human race is to continue to evolve upward, we need to help it out a little bit by discouraging those who are unfit, in his thinking, and encouraging those who are the elite, so that the human race will keep evolving upward. So he felt it was really wrong to give the poor, the disadvantaged medical care. You weren't really helping survival of the fittest if you did that. So you should just let them die. As a matter of fact, some of the things he said even would give you the impression he thought those people should be wiped out. He believed, in fact, in sterilization to keep those people from being born. Now, this had a very big effect. This man was part of the elite. And these doctrines spread everywhere. In the United States, this had a very big effect. You don't hear a lot about this, but nevertheless, in the end of the 1800s, really the first part of the 20th century up until pretty much the middle of the 20th century, the word eugenics was in common use. And that just is talking about evolution in this social context of purifying the race. A lot of times that's what they would say, purifying the human race. They called it racial hygiene sometimes. And they believed that through selective breeding, the human species should direct its own evolution. They believed in the forcible sterilization of the poor, the disabled, and those they considered immoral. The interesting thing about this whole thing, they got extensive funding from corporate foundations like the Carnegie Institute, the Rockefeller Foundation, the Ford Foundation, and so on. In other words, these are the foundations that are set up by the elite that even back then were working towards the global one world government. So all of this is part of that agenda as well. This is something that I think is amazing. Eugenics was widely accepted in the U.S. academic community. That's a direct quote. Just how accepted? By 1928, there were 376 separate university courses in some of the United States' leading schools, enrolling more than 20,000 students, which included eugenics in the curriculum. By 1910, there was a large and dynamic network of scientists, reformers, and professionals engaged in national eugenics projects and actively promoting eugenics legislation. Now, this included actual forced sterilization of people. They would go out, they would take people they considered undesirable, they would get a court order, they would hold them down, and they would sterilize them while they're screaming. And the establishment was all for it. They were all behind it. 28 United States had laws on the books allowing this to happen. When you heard about Martin Luther King and civil rights, and perhaps you heard about segregation, did you ever wonder how that happened? That there was segregation? You know, they always give you the idea that somehow the Christians did that. Somehow it was the Christians that were prejudiced, and they're the ones that invented the segregation. No, that wasn't it at all. It was these people. It was the scientists. It was the professionals, the eugenicists, that wanted to separate the races in order to keep the races apart so the human race would not be polluted in their view. And that's why they enacted laws segregating the races. Look it up. It's all there. It was the progressives that did it. Okay? Most of these people were, in fact, members of the Democratic Party, the Progressive Party. And they did this because this was the progressive thing to do, to move the agenda of evolution forward. You know, when you dig a little bit, you find out things are a lot different in history than you have been told. This was a horrible time in America when all this was going on. And I should say it was not only black people that were receiving this discrimination. A lot of poor white people were subjected to this kind of treatment as well. And they were also forcibly sterilized. People with a below average IQ, in many cases, were subjected to this. This was an elite program aimed at those, I guess, who were the most not elite, if you understand what I'm saying. Now, who was doing this? Well, one of the famous people, progressives, behind this was Margaret Sanger. And I've told you about her before. No doubt you've heard a lot about her. She is the founder of Planned Parenthood, which is continuing to carry on her agenda. And her main thing was and is abortion. But she also advocated sterilization, and she also advocated segregation of the races. And she was racist. This lives on. A majority of Planned Parenthood facilities are located in black neighborhoods. That's because there's racial targeting by Planned Parenthood. And an actual quote from her, from a letter she wrote December 10th, 1939, "We do not want the word to get out that we want to exterminate the Negro population." This was her thinking. So they had a plan, whereas what they did is they involved African American ministers and told them that this was something that could benefit the African American community. And they got a lot of the African American ministers on their side. But they had this ulterior motive of simply really wanting to wipe out the community. And here's what's happened since then. A black child is 2.33 times more likely to be killed in the womb than a white child. On average, 1,876 black babies are aborted every day in the United States. Now, I'm quoting stats that are actually written out here. This is from stop.org and blackgenocide.org, both sites who are run by leaders of the African American community who are trying to get the word out to that community about Margaret Sanger and the dangers of what she started and what she was really trying to accomplish. Now, I don't even need to know any more than this about her to know that she was inspired by the doctrines of demons. Right? You don't even need to know anymore to know that. However, it is documented. Sanger formed a close relationship with Havelock Ellis. Now, you might wonder, who was he? Well, he was the vice president of the Eugenics Education Society in London, as well as the president of the Galton Institute. As you can imagine, he was essentially the head person in eugenics. It was he who introduced Sanger to Rosicrucianism, a form of esoteric occultism. and he initiated her into secret wisdom. Where do you think those secrets came from? Sanger's fascination with the occult led her into communicating with spirits. Death. That's what spirits want. Death and misery. They hate everybody. They want to wipe out everybody because in every human being there is the image of the Creator. They want to wipe out every person. Do you know in the scriptures we have, for example, Molech and many other false gods that had an insatiable appetite for sacrifice, human sacrifice. That's what all of these abortions are actually about. Human sacrifice to the false gods of Margaret Sanger and Charles Darwin. That's the real story.
Was this video informative? Click the like button below to help spread the word to others. Feel free to leave a comment and share your thoughts. Don't forget to subscribe and ring the bell so you won't miss out on more amazing content from Eliyahu Ben David.